Looking forward to this. Hello and welcome to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. I am Raimundo Perez and I am hosting tonight David McAlexander, fellow member of the club. He has a pristine and well-known within the club as a Navy flyer, and he'll be sharing his experiences today to help us inform about the future of nuclear weapons. David, welcome to the club.
Thank you so much. We have a long tradition of military service people, because Uncle Sam says, join up, see all the 7 continents, and they'll send you to weird places and make you do weird things.
So this will be an interesting conversation, partly because, someone like me has 99 problems. Nuclear war is not one. But the question is, should it be?
When I was younger, if you're old enough, and I'm 60 years old, the threat of nuclear war was there all the time. This was a very real concern, and we just got used to it, except if you joined up. And if you were in the military, it wasn't unusual that you used these things. It was, well, not everybody used them, but it was almost expected that if stuff happened, that it would be nuclear. And everyone thought that would be a terrible idea. And I want you all to know the point of this program is not to rah-rah about these things. It's how we kept that genie in the bottle for 80 years. Because we last used those things 80 years ago, and we have not used them since. And let's hope we don't. And I'll give away the whole program here by saying the upshot is all these PhD and game theorists that said, how do we avoid this problem, told us if 2 sides have nuclear weapons, they both have to be sure that if they use one, they'll get one in return, and they won't get what they want, so they shouldn't try it. They say the only use of a nuclear weapon is deterring the other side from using them. And so far for 80 years, that experiment has worked, and I'm going to try to talk about why I think it's going to keep working in the future.
Yeah, we do see some conflict today, particularly with Ukraine and Russia in the news. And we interpret these news, and some of us understand what's happening to an extent, but there might be layers to it that might inform what potential ways in which those wars could affect us, or just military war in the future.
So I picked this topic because I was a last-minute fill-in. We had a cancellation. And as Phoebe said, I had 35 years of experience. No, I had experiences 35 years ago, not 30 years since. I couldn't talk about this if I'd had 30 years of current service. But so everything I'm going to tell you is old, outdated, and comes from unclassified civilian publications you can buy at a newsstand. No one should send me to Leavenworth for some of the things I'm going to say. But I brought up this topic because Vladimir Putin's been, they say, rattling the nuclear saber. He'll occasionally talk about, if we don't get what we want in Ukraine, or if NATO comes too close, we have nukes. Should we take that seriously? And the short answer is you have to take people with nuclear weapons seriously. But what's going to stop him from actually doing that? The other reason I got on this topic is 32 years ago, I was floating in the Arabian Gulf, and our nation asked me to help plan missions against these Iranian nuclear reactors. Because 33 years ago, we were worried about Iranian nuclear weapons coming, we thought, next week. And so I actually helped plan strikes against some of the targets that were hit recently by our country. And it was just so surreal to wake up and see in the news smoking holes where you plan to go and put a smoking hole. And the other reason I'm talking to you is the Adventurers Club, or Ray putting this in the context of adventure, is the whole subject is just surreal. It seems unthinkable because it kind of is. It's out of everyone's ordinary activity. And yet there are people whose daily job is to make sure they're ready to turn Moscow into a smoking parking lot, if necessary, so they don't have to do that. And if you buy that, well, that's what's kept us from not blowing up the world in the last 80 years.
Well, you mentioned working with old technology, but I get a sense that what you had worked with at that time still has threads into today.
Well, yes, because a lot of the technology that we have today, when the Berlin Wall came down, we didn't put new money into these things. We didn't update these systems. We updated some of the electronics and the radio communications, the codes to make sure they're secure. But the fundamental hardware that's in place, and I'll give you the other theme of today's presentation. Here's today's presentation. What NATO has sitting in their bunkers today to deter Russia, and I don't mean the United States, I mean NATO, the European, the alliance. They have American bombs on Belgian, Italian, German, Dutch bases. But those bombs were designed in the 60s, and they were deployed to Europe in the 80s. And they're still there, and they're carried by airplanes that as recently as last year, most of those countries were flying the same airplane that they had in the 1980s when the Berlin Wall came down. So that if Putin, here's the upshot, if Putin tried to use a nuke in Europe, NATO would have a response that is kind of circa 1988, which is exactly when I was in and doing these things. And only as a result of this invasion of Ukraine has Europe suddenly gotten off the ball and said, oh my God, there are evil people in the world. We may need to get a bigger stick to keep these guys at bay.
So your story then, from 1988, is still impactful for today. Shall we kind of deep dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Should we talk a little bit about, again, more background of how I got there, or what on earth would make a young lad or lass join up and end up working with
I
the
think that's
Bolsheviks?
important because the psychology of how one looks at war from a youth, is that related to how people see war today?
So you never go to the recruiter or get recruited thinking you're going to be the one that comes home wrapped in a flag. You think you're going to be magic, smart, strong, agile. And the recruiter never says, like, come and do this super dangerous thing and maybe, kill innocent people by mistake. They instead say, your grandparents fought in the Great War against the Nazis or the fascists. Most people who join up have a family history or they've read the books, and they want to serve. Think of how young people want to change the world and make it better. And then the recruiter dangles, well, you can wear a cool uniform, and literally, they told me they'd paint my name on the side of an airplane, send me around the world, and introduce me to a lot of interesting young ladies. What 22-year-old do you know doesn't want to say yes to that?
It sounds like it assigns value to you as an individual, and then you want to take that value and expand upon it.
So many people, wherever they grew up, they're convinced it's Smallville and someone else is having more fun over there, and they want to get out of Dodge and get to the big city. And joining the Navy or the Air Force or the Army has often been a way, not just to see the world, but to get out of your hometown. You know, I'm a short man who wears glasses, and I was a high school nerd, but I got to put on this uniform and eventually earned this set of gold wings that made me feel extra cocky and made people treat me differently. And that appeal is intoxicating, and that appeal's been through the ages. People became Roman centurions for that very same reason, because they wanted to get out of the backwaters of Venice and they wanted to go someplace and do something.
And it seems warrior is a kind of renowned way of going through a rite of passage.
Rite of passage. Because guess who does this stuff? Young people, usually young men. Who else is going to charge a machine gun nest? It's not rational. It's not just the hubris, but also societies through history and today. You take your young men and you make them do some ritual. They climb a mountain or they get pierced in weird ways in Africa. But you become a man on the other side. And for so long, everyone of my parents' generation, they had all served. All the dads in my neighborhood had either fought in World War II or in Korea. And there was a pecking order in the neighborhood of whose dad had done what. Like, his dad landed on the beaches of Normandy. It was just automatically cooler than the dad who, as the movie Patton said, had shoveled shit in Louisiana.
So when you first showed up, did it live up to your expectations?
No, it starts off slow and easy. They don't, when you're in training, bring out the technical, complicated stuff, and they certainly don't say, now here are the nuclear weapons, and it's a gradual process. Our books would say things like, this Russian bomber is both capable of conventional and nuclear attack. And that's all it would say. And you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, and you get so used to that. But no, you don't actually start dealing with the more serious stuff until you've been in for not months, but years, and you've been adopted to the tribe or programmed to the tribe. In training and in the military, they convince you there's a difference between slimy civilians with their sloppy ways, and they don't have creases in their trousers, and they don't stand erect, and they certainly don't fight for the freedom of other people. And after you've been, it's a separate culture, or a cult even. I will say the military is a cult by some definitions. And you get used to being different and over here, and slowly the idea of doing things you'd never imagined before starts to become reasonable.
So did you find then the transition something you enjoyed from civilian life into military?
I ate it up. I was looking for more meaning in my life. I was looking for purpose, and Uncle Sam gave it to me. And then they actually sent me off to a hot war. You were asking before about how you got into it. The recruiter had said, you won't have to fight anybody. This was post-Vietnam when I'm signing up. We had an anti-military. We didn't want to get involved in any nation's conflicts. And the recruiter said, come on, if we fight the Russians, that would be nuclear, and that would be crazy. No one's going to do that. You won't have to do anything serious. You'll just get to wear this cool uniform, get a paycheck, have some fun, then get college benefits. Well, the Berlin Wall comes down. They then send me to a hot war in Iraq, enforcing UN resolutions for world peace. I've never fought a war. I've only fought in 2 UN peacekeeping missions. But I just happened to be in a unit that was right in the middle of it. And I was with guys who'd been in the military for 15 years and never had to practice their profession. They'd been ready to do it. They could have been great. They never got the call. Suddenly, I'm an ensign in a hot war. It's like being a minor league player being called up to the major leagues when your team's in the World Series. And then I got this experience that later made me a tactics instructor, which is why I hope I'm not too pedantic when I start talking about the hardware and the tactics here.
So it sounds like, before we dip into this photo, that you're talking about the Desert Storm.
Desert Storm.
Okay. So from that point, you're on board an aircraft carrier?
I trained. More men who walked on the moon were naval aviators than Air Force guys. All my heroes growing up were naval aviators. Because 1972, I'm watching the Olympics in Munich, and Mark Spitz is winning 7 gold medals, and he's a worldwide hero. But in my neighborhood, we're in San Francisco Bay Area, home of the Pacific Fleet, and there's a guy that just shot down 5 MiGs. And the kids in my school knew Duke Cunningham's name. And Mark Spitz could swim in a swimming pool really fast, and they gave him gold medals. But Duke Cunningham took this supersonic 40,000-pound jet airplane, turned it upside down in enemy territory, and gunned down other people that, 5 other Red Barons that were trying to gun him down. And that seemed like to have a little more gravitas, shall we say, or an extreme of human performance.
So for context, are we saying the Red Barons are Iraqi soldiers?
The Red Barons would be, in this case, they were not just Vietnamese MiG pilots. Often they were Russian MiG pilots.
MiG pilots.
Flying, yeah. But the idea that I got into naval aviation because, weirdly, we take... do our sports teams represent our nation's best? Or do our fighter pilots represent our nation's best? This seemed like an elite group that I could join that did some substantive stuff that also mattered and could change world history. Because on the question of why do people join, I meant to bring up what I call the Greta Thunberg issue. You remember Greta, who's so passionate about global warming, she's convinced you're all crazy because you're not doing anything. She wants to get out there and do stuff. And that's what makes people strap on a jet, launch into the Pacific Ocean, and bomb someone else's territory because the UN told them it was a good idea. And going back to it, they wanted to save the world, or in my case, they wanted to prevent a nuclear war by making sure no one started it.
Right. So you had this fire inside you.
There was some
Especially
motivation.
if you had role models that you wanted to pattern yourself.
And everyone else around me did too. I mean the groupthink. I cannot tell you how much groupthink there was, but I interrupt.
And these are other soldiers your age?
I'm a 24-year-old
sailors.
junior aviator. The lieutenant commanders are late 20s, early 30s. The skipper is 36 or 37. The admiral's 45. And these guys seem like serious men and silverbacks. And I look back on it, and they're barely kids.
Right. And you're able to form bonds with your fellow crew.
You form deep bonds, because I have never been on a team before where everybody else had the same objective so much. We all bought into the same, we were there for a reason. It was hard to get there. You had to fight to be in that airplane, to earn the right to be in that airplane. And I'm not saying once I got there, it wasn't a surprise. I'm like, oh, did I make the right choice?
Right.
People are shooting at me. But we had a bond. I had great respect. Like, I joined my squadron when they had just gotten back from escorting the reflagged Kuwaiti tankers. There'd been this blockade in the Persian Gulf, and the U.S. Navy made these tankers American flagged, so we escorted them. And when I joined the squadron, the guys who were 1 tour ahead of me had just sank half the Iranian Navy. And this is what I'm reading about in the paper every day. And suddenly I'm a peer with these people. And of course, if you're an adventurer, you all know about imposter syndrome. Everyone totally has imposter syndrome. I walk into this room and there's a guy who sank the Sahand frigate of the Iranian Navy. And he's my peer? No, I am not his peer. And it takes a long time before you realize they were just junior varsity not too long ago.
I'm really interested to hear, because it sounds like you started off, as you were mentioning, a nerdy kid with glasses, and then you were able to formulate bonds
I still am.
through the military or through the Navy. So from that point, did that enhance the strategy, being the fact that you're able to work well with all these people?
It was a great experience because I did learn to work well with a bunch of people from different places. One of the great things in the military is you serve with someone from all 50 states and provinces and the Philippines, and you learn that just because someone talks with a southern drawl doesn't mean they're dumb. And sometimes you also learn how to get along with, we had some guys that were not rocket scientists, and you need to get along with everybody.
So do you want to share from that point, the role you played, what your position was?
So let's actually talk a little more about, we're going to get onto my exact position or some roles, but Phoebe, can we go to the next slide? Because to bring us back a little bit to our subject, how did I get into the deterrent business? My airplane was designed to see the bad guys coming. And the bad guys in the 1980s were Russian, and they had this airplane that's on the screen right now. And you can see the people standing below it for size. That is a supersonic nuclear bomber called the Backfire bomber, the Tupolev Tu-22. And it's the size of the Concorde, and it's the same shape, speed of the Concorde. And here's some fun trivia. I was a Pacific Fleet sailor out of San Diego, so I never got to intercept the Concorde. The Concorde flies Paris and London to New York. The Grumman factory that built my airplane and the F-14 fighter we worked with is on Long Island, New York, where the Concorde flies by every day. And because it goes the same speed, the same altitude, same profile, we practiced intercepting the Concorde every time it flew into JFK. There were guys watching it on radar. There were radar intercept officers queuing up, missiles on cold, trust me. You actually don't carry missiles around in the homeland. But we used to practice against Concorde because this thing was fast, and it carried an early cruise missile that's bigger than an SUV. It's the size of an early jet fighter, the size of a Learjet. And it had a megaton-class atomic weapon to use against the aircraft carrier. And nuclear war, they probably aren't going to start out nuking cities, because it turns out that's the last thing anybody wants to blow up, because it makes the other side retaliate. If they're going to use nukes anywhere, they're going to use them at sea, because there are no civilians around. There's no dirt to get sucked up and make fallout. And by the way, fallout is mainly dirt. If you set off a bomb on the ground, which you sometimes have to do to bust the bunker, that makes a big fallout cloud. If you set it off over the ocean, you make a bunch of radioactive steam, which I wouldn't breathe, but it's not the same thing. So early on, we faced this threat of nuclear bombs. And I mention this because my plane was designed for air defense against these suckers. Can we have the next slide, Phoebe? This never happened, but this is like what we dreamed about back in the day. If we did our job right, this is what it would be looking like. And I found this at the Rose Bowl swap meet. It's a painting, I had to buy it. But let's go one more, and I'll try to stop emphasizing the Greta Thunberg problem. But I say Greta Thunberg because she's so passionate, she's convinced it's a world-critical problem. And this was the world-critical problem. I showed the Russian bomber. We wanted to shoot them down in the air, yes. But even better, if you don't want your ship to get blown up, you don't wait for them to fly against you. You go and blow them up while they're sitting on the ground before they can attack you. That seemed important, just to defend us. But the Greta Thunberg thing is, and my first slide said, what would you do to defend your homeland? The Russians had all these nuclear ballistic missile submarines that could launch missiles from right outside, right in the middle of the Pacific, and blow up Omaha or San Diego. And the Navy told us, if World War III is going to happen, and you can get to this, they keep all these submarines in port because they don't trust their commanders to be out unsupervised much. They keep their stuff close. They're like, if there's going to be a nuclear war, and if we can drop one atomic bomb on that port and blow up 10 submarines with 120 missiles aimed at American cities, like what young lad couldn't say that's wearing the white hat? And it's just so weird to say that I thought I was wearing the white hat because I was willing to drop one nuclear bomb to try to stop 120 to 250 of them, which is why I say this whole thing is surreal, and I apologize. I'm also seeming a little worked up about this because literally, like when you try to devote, I spent 8 years of my life doing this. It seemed important, and it's hard to explain to people who haven't been there.
Well, it sounds like, how old were you at the time?
24 through 30.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of responsibility at that age, and your psychology in that situation was important because people's lives are in your hands. And so how do you get to that point where you could do your job with respect to the position, but also the people that will surround you? It seems like the way you proceeded and had the specific outlook was for the benefit of others. You framed it as defense for your home.
That's what soldiers tell themselves. You know, you might have heard from Vietnam, we had to destroy the village to save it. From the outside, it seems to make no sense, and yet from the inside, it can make a huge amount of sense. I hope that's
because I'm actually curious, and it doesn't have to be answered now, but does that evolve, that way of thinking evolve as you go through this experience?
Yes, because, Phoebe, if we can do a next slide or two, and that submarine base I just showed you was on the little bit of Siberia hanging off that map of the Soviet Union. And I just have this here because, in theory, we wouldn't just launch against that base. We could be anywhere in the Pacific Ocean. And as long as we had a big tanker, a big wing tanker, a DC-10 or something, we could launch off the boat and be at that Siberian base in less than 12 hours from wherever. And the wherever means you're hiding out because you're expecting them to come and hit you. So it also felt, at the same time, felt very global and engaged. I love maps. I grew up on National Geographic. Any case, that's an aside. Another slide, please, Phoebe, and I'll try to get through. This is another artwork of, this is why I'm going to talk about airplanes in the Ukraine situation. Because it turns out, if you want to hit anything that moves, you need a flexible response. If you don't know where it is, if it's hiding, like this Russian train that would chug around with nuclear missiles, it's not in one place. You often have to go find it. And that might happen in the Ukraine situation. One more, Phoebe, and I'll get out of the history business. This is actually, we have a friend in the audience who went to school in St. Petersburg. I don't know if you ever went to the Railroad Museum that has this actual nuclear train, but this is how the Russians tried to play the shell game to keep us from blowing up their ace in the hole, because they wanted to be able to say, don't you try it. If you try it on us, we'll get back on you. They put it on a train, and that's I'm told, why the US built the B-2 bomber, because you can shoot a missile at another missile in a silo where you know where it is. But to track something down, you might have to send a dude or dudette with eyeballs to see, look, oh, there's the train we're looking for. Okay. One more. I'm going to pause or go.
Well, that's interesting context. What's showing how the infrastructure of
Yeah, and those trains are still out there on the rails, by the way.
Right.
Because you don't want to leave your valuable stuff where somebody knows where it is, because it ain't going to be there in the morning.
Right. And your place in that infrastructure and what you could potentially do or not do to it or how it might impact you. It seems like there's a lot of things going on in your mind as you're considering all these circumstances.
Well, what went on in my mind is the wall came down, and a lot of the guys I joined up with started getting laid off. Like, I knew guys who got married and had kids, bought a house, thinking they're going to have a job for 6 years. And they didn't get sent to a war. They didn't have the experience I did, so I got to stay in. They're unemployed. They have mortgage payments. But instead, remember I said that the recruiter said I'd never fight the Russians. Instead, they sent me to fight the Iraqis, which felt like a total bait and switch. I and about 500,000 other Americans said, is this worth my dying for? This is not what I signed up for.
Well, that's interesting because you're looking at images of Russian infrastructure, and how advanced is that compared to the Iraq infrastructure? It seems like now you're going into this whole new situation that you didn't prepare for.
I'm glad you mentioned the Iraqi infrastructure, because if you saw Desert Storm on television, it looked easy. Trust me, it was not so easy. They had the 4th largest army in the world. They just finished fighting Iran for 10 years. They were seasoned. They had 400 MiGs. They were the 5th largest air force. Went Russia, China, US, either France or Britain, and then Iraq. So these guys should have been able to hurt us. If we'd had their stuff, we would have been able to hurt ourselves. But we had better training, we had better stuff. And here's the other thing I will say. After, just so I don't forget, the other part of this picture, that is my workstation in the back of the airplane, in that slide in the upper left. I fought 44 days in a war looking at a radar scope with a data link sending me information from all over the place, talking to people on the radio. Outside, that's not the airplane I flew. That's the planes I was controlling and helping get into enemy territory. That's an A6 Intruder. It's a 2-person, long-range, all-weather plane. And I show that here now just because part of the NATO deterrent force is a single-seater, which I don't think is going to work very well at night and in bad weather. Plus, do you want to go alone? Part of the NATO infrastructure is still a dual-seater. If you have to go somewhere really scary, it's always easier if you have a buddy, isn't it?
So with these photos coming up, is this going into what your role and position was, your responsibilities?
Absolutely. My responsibilities was to help that ugly bumblebee-shaped bomber weave its way through either not being detected by enemy radars, and we didn't just see enemy airplanes. We had listening devices, so we could pick up and say, hey, there's a radar there. If you fly too close to him, he'll see you and shoot you. Because before you can shoot someone with a missile, you got to see him on radar back in the day. That's no longer true. But so my job was to help my buddies get in and out of the target alive and not be intercepted by MiGs, or if fighters did come up, we'd send our fighters to head them off at the pass. And so, yeah, I used to get crap from my buddies. Said, I never flew over the MiG base and dropped bombs like they did every night. But if you wanted to stop my aircraft carrier launching 24 bombers into your territory, you'd shoot down my airplane, so the guys were uncoordinated and had no advance warning. So that was kind of my role then.
Right.
Phoebe, another, please. Oh, I helped do this. I'm going to talk about NATO and Europe. Because of the Cold War, everyone was afraid of nukes. In Europe and in Iraq, these are hardened aircraft shelters, giant concrete garages where you park a fighter jet or a bomber so that and they're literally hardened against nuclear blast. They're shaped, they're rounded, so if someone sets off a nuclear bomb near your base, giant wind comes by. As long as the doors are closed, you might be okay inside. Ironically, though, you can still hit them with the equivalent of an ice pick. And because we weren't dropping nuclear bombs in Iraq, we ended up taking out their Air Force by using individual laser-guided bombs to, and it wasn't the bang that punched through the concrete. We first dropped 500-pound bombs on these things, and they bounced off, just like the human skull or like a Tiger tank. If you know World War II, you could shoot at a Tiger tank and the shell would bounce off. But if you hit it with a big enough shell, it would thwack the other side of the concrete, and a bunch of particles would rain out. So in any case, we ended up dropping 2,000-pound bombs, and the mere kinetic energy would punch through several feet of concrete and blow up their planes inside. So ironically, a nuclear-proof bomb shelter can still be taken out with non-nuclear weapons. And by the way, that was the other revolution of my war. It used to be if you wanted to wipe out the Soviet armies coming into Europe, they had so much stuff, you couldn't get it all. You had to use a nuke. But we started to get the smart bomb revolution and the ability to put individually target. And guys said, hey, if we can threaten the enemy's important stuff and hit it with a conventional laser-guided bomb, not a nuke, we not only won't have to use nukes, but we can say, we can fend you off because our stuff is better. And so even using your nuke is useless because you still won't get anywhere. It'll only make us nuke you in return.
Did they plan that when they're designing these shelters? Like, did they expect that these conventional weapons would actually impact it, or was that a surprise to them?
Basically, until the mid-'80s, we didn't have the capability to be accurate enough. If you flew over an enemy's airfield, you come from 400 miles away, you've been dodging missiles, you've been dodging MiGs. If you get close and you had to do old-fashioned dive bombing and try to drop your bomb, you're going to miss. You're not going to hit. And in fact, in these two, which again are in Iraq, and they're called Yugos because they were built by a Yugoslav construction company because they made a lot of the Soviet or the Eastern Bloc hardened aircraft shelters. And by the way, just as an aside, you can see some parking aprons on this. Either way, it's like a drive-through. You can drive your airplane. Those little driveways lead to the main runway. You can drive your airplane up into it, refuel it, put a new bomb on, drive it out the back door. But until we got the laser-guided bomb, we couldn't specifically hit it at the right angle. And here's why I'm talking about it. The top one has a big hole in it. We were able to drop a giant bomb straight through, which took accuracy. The one on the bottom actually got hit in the door. At first, we're attacking these things. And remember I said the bombs would bounce off. We're trying to get the bomb to go to the door because it's steel, not concrete. But you had to be at such a precise angle to hit the door that in the old days, you were going to miss. In fact, I'll tell you a secret about airdrop bombs. You're still going to miss. Whatever you aim at, you're trying to hit this point, you'll be off by 1 meter or 3 meters, and that's good. So in the old days, they didn't think a conventional weapon could take out these, which is why both sides built all these. And by the way, this is where NATO still hides its stuff, because this concrete enclosure is a great place to have the vault that keeps your nuclear weapon so nobody steals it.
That's interesting, because it sounds like what this conversation will be about, and this as an example, is you're sharing your experiences, and at the time, the technology just wasn't there for these precise attacks. Now you're mentioning like laser-guided missiles, for example, coming into play. And has the technology evolved further?
Oh, technology has advanced radically. And I'll tell you right now, I mentioned the Ukraine. In aerial warfare in the Ukraine, there's been a complete revolution on the non-nuclear side. It is no longer safe for anyone. The Russians cannot fly into Ukrainian airspace without getting shot down by ground-based missiles. The Ukrainians can't go into the Russian airspace. Things have gotten so sophisticated, they have to stay at a distance and basically lob things from a distance. And without precision-guided weapons, there's almost everything has changed, except NATO's nuclear infrastructure, and to some extent the Russians too. They put some more money and came up with these scarier new things, but they still aren't sure how they work, or if they'll work great. And that's the thing about, you never know if the new technology is really going to work until you test it in combat. So all the rules of old air combat have changed, and what Russia is threatening us with and what NATO is threatening back is the old stuff that we're pretty sure won't work in today's field. Like, I'm here to tell you that most of the NATO bombers, if they try to use them, they're not going to get through. And the only question is, will one or two get through, and will that be enough? And it all depends on what you're targeting and blah, blah, blah.
Right. It also seems like you also have supporting technology like flight simulators to be able to have more precise attacks when you're actually in the field.
Flight simulators have been huge because you can rehearse your mission over and over. We had computer simulators where we would fight World War III in the lab over and over, so it was second nature, and so you became quite robot-like. And if it actually happened, and I'll tell you, having fought in Desert Storm, it was just like training. I'd done it, like, hey, we always wondered, would this work? Would our training be right? Well, all we had to do, knew how to do was our training. And the more you've done something, it just becomes automatic. And again, you think less and less, is this a good idea? And more, you just, I'm going to do this.
Right. Just makes me think of video games today and where that goes.
Well, it also means that before anyone goes into enemy territory, they rehearse that mission over and over in the simulator. So they should be ready for the challenge. The B-2s that hit the Iranian facilities, they'd been training for that mission for 15 years. Next slide, if we can, Phoebe, because I got to get through some, and next one too, because I talk too much and have too many pictures. Why do I have a picture of a ziggurat here? This is a Sumerian ziggurat. Sumeria is in the country we now call Iraq. One of the air bases we're bombing that had been an RAF air base in World War II had a ziggurat 2 miles from the runway. And I put this here because of cultural treasures. I had a buddy literally say in the air wing, we make new people all the time. We don't make new ziggurats. Don't hit the fucking ziggurat.
Right.
And when you talk about nuclear weapons or deterrence, cultural treasures, you don't want to deprive the world of them. Like in World War II, to stop the Nazis, we firebombed Dresden. Beautiful medieval city. All these cultural treasures were destroyed. Well, was it worth it? At the time, stopping the Nazis seemed worth it. In retrospect, should we have made that decision? Don't know. But hopefully at the end, I will go back to this cultural thing. And sometimes, maybe, if you want to deter the undeterrable person, you need to threaten what they love. And it could be, like, how do you deter a suicide bomber if he's not afraid to die? Well, if you tell him, I'll blow up what you love most. Like, you don't care if you die. You may not even care if your family dies. But if you lose your ziggurat or your holy site. So I believe some of deterrence in the nation, a nation in the Middle East that will not go named, but if you're in the Middle East and if someone nukes your capital, one way you might deter them from attacking you is to say, if you blow up our city, we're going to blow up your pilgrimage site. And your religion will lose its most valuable thing. And everyone in heaven will hate you. And maybe you can deter a suicidal person that way. How's that for crazy nuclear logic?
How many miles was this from the airport?
I said 2 or 3, I don't remember. It was in the bounds of the airbase.
Right. It's really interesting if it was a strategic decision on their part to do that. Maybe it's reverse psychology.
Well, that country did put a lot of their valuable stuff next to the hospital, next to the baby milk factory. But there you build air bases where Mother Nature has regular winds and they're great locations. And it just happened to be a perfect place for an air base. It was a perfect place for a religious ziggurat, too. But I also show this just to show the military made me travel and feel connected with the world. I went to places I'd read in the National Geographic. And that's why people keep joining up, and that's why your nephew or cousin is going to want to join up when they turn 21.
Well, thank you for not blowing that up, because I think I'm actually going to visit that soon.
Yes, you are going to Iraq.
Yeah.
I hope they don't hold it against you that you've been on the same stage with me.
So, yeah, but let's continue.
Let's go
looking at
on to some
photos.
really scary stuff. Here is what do these things look like? This is inside the NATO, a NATO shelter. NATO has what they call the Nuclear Sharing Program, and we also have in the audience a former European military officer that knows the Nuclear Sharing Program. But that is, Belgium is not a nuclear country. Italy isn't a nuclear power, except they are. there are approximately, today, 20 nuclear bombs, and again, I'm just getting this out of stuff you can buy on a bookshelf, and if you want to see pictures, you can see the details here. There are American bombs, so-called dual key or nuclear sharing. We might put it, if Italy gets attacked and Italy wants to say, you can't come into Rome, if you send tanks over the border, we're going to either nuke the tanks or we're going to nuke you. You don't have nukes. Well, Uncle Sam will give us his bomb, we put it on an Italian plane, and an Italian person flies off. And an Italian person drops the bomb. Oh, because what if the enemy army has come into your territory? What if you're German? Do you want an American pilot and you have to stop the army on your own soil? It's always easier if the local guy drops it. In case, we have these nuclear sharing. It's a shelter, and that thing where the silver bomb is hanging is the world's most secure bank vault. It rises up out of the ground only when you've met a whole bunch of stuff. And trust me, it's easier to open the time deposit safe at Fort Knox than to get that open. And inside, that is an F-16, which for you airplane geeks in the audience, you think of the F-16 as a dogfighting fighter. It's good for shooting down other airplanes. Yes. But also it was built to be a lower cost export fighter exported to Europe. It replaced, in the German case, the F-104 Starfighter, which may be the coolest looking plane ever. But it's a single-seater. And so now you might have one guy going off alone to try to do this, which again, I can't fathom doing that. But that's where we keep this, and there's each of these countries I've told you about in this nuclear sharing program, you search Wikipedia, you can learn a lot more about it, has 10 to 15 of these hardened concrete shelters, and inside the shelter is the weapons storage vault, and it's mainly designed to keep it from being stolen, because these are a nation's crown jewels. Let's go to the next slide, Phoebe, when you're able. Oh, okay, so I forgot the order here. This is what one of those NATO bases looks like. This is Buchen in Buchel, I'm mispronouncing it. It's a German air base, and if you see that ring with the greenery, you can see a long line, that's the runway. And right at the end of the runway is a ring of a bunch of those hardened aircraft shelters, about 11 or 12 of them. And each one has a driveway that leads straight onto the runway. So you can fuel your plane, get your guy ready, and the bad guys are going to be watching you, whether by satellite or having a spy outside the fence. And trust me, in Europe, they have people that live next door to the base whose job is just to watch and call, hey, things are taking off. But they can taxi. The door can open, plane engines on, comes rolling out onto the runway. No stopping for tower clearance like at LAX. Can be airborne in 30 to 60 seconds. And all of those hardened aircraft shelters are facing in different directions. So if someone does attack it with a nuke or other bomb, they won't all get their doors blown in from a certain direction. Next slide, please, Phoebe, because I was going to try to show what is, and here we actually can see a B-61. Again, called a B-61 because 1961 is the year it was designed. Produced in the early mid-60s. We made 3,000 of these, and this is what it was on my boat. Also, we had, they're not only still around today, they've upgraded it a little bit. I thought I had another picture, if we can go forward. Yes, this talks about, and that's a B-61 hanging under that security, and he's got the door open. The enlisted man with 4 stripes on his shoulder, meaning that's like I believe he's an E4 if I speak Air Force. That's a 22-year-old non-college graduate who's charged with maintaining this weapon, and next to him is a 4-star general, the most important guy in the military. And isn't it kind of weird that these super valuable things are maintained by young lads? But one more, because I want to show again, we spent not millions, but trillions of dollars. And Phoebe, if one more slide to the complicated, yes. This is the inside of a B-61 nuclear bomb. Pictures from Wikipedia, nothing classified, is released into the public. The actual bomb component, the bang, is just that silver can kind of in the upper left. That's this side. Almost all the rest of it are the electronics designed to make it secure so no one can hotwire it if they steal it. They might steal it. They aren't going to make it go off because it has all these special precautions and I will briefly mention these. You have to put in a code. And by the way, remember I said it was my job to help our bombers get into enemy territory. The other part of my being involved in a nuclear war would be to simply relay the final bit of the code to the guys once they got close. Because they don't arm a nuclear bomb fully and let you take off and go fly around, even in a hot war. One, they're hoping to negotiate an end to the sucker so they don't have to drop it. They want you to fly to the target, and they won't give you the last couple digits to make that thing go active until you get close and until National Command Authority, and we now mean the President and the Secretary of the Defense, by the way. The current president and no president could ever make a war happen himself, all by himself. He can say, do it, but a whole bunch of other people have to say, okay, now we'll do it. I'd radio the code to these guys, and you put the final code in, and the thing now might be armed, except you could steal that code. So there are other safety precautions, like environmental sensing. Our airdropped bombs wouldn't arm themselves unless they felt the G-force of a catapult shot. They're on an airplane. They want to when you get launched off a ship, you're strapped to a catapult, and he goes 0 to 150 miles an hour in 3 seconds. If that thing didn't feel X number of Gs, immediately followed by the air getting thinner and colder as the plane climbs up, it's not going to go off even if you steal the codes and program it. I can't tell you how hard they worked to make these things unusable by the bad guys. And they worked much harder than they also worked to make sure they'd go off when you wanted it and everything lined up. Except there's so many steps in there, if you screw up one of them, it just ain't going to work. And I'll summarize again that our nation somehow spent trillions of dollars building these things. And we're not likely to give them up, not because we put that money in, but because as long as anyone else has them, we want to make sure we have some too. Back to you, Rams.
It's really interesting just hearing about the guardrails that are in place when you're responsible for these weaponry. And then comparing that to seeing like a 22-year-old who's maintaining this type of weaponry as well. It feels like there's a lot of attention to detail and care to a certain extent that reflects upon like Navy intelligence, where there's responsibility going into these situations and doing these types of bombings.
So the responsibility, and it's divided up among so many people. My aircraft carrier had 5,000 people on board. There were only 150 odd aviators. But everyone on that boat had an important job in the intel center, in the magazines, keeping these safe down below and bringing them up and arming them when they're ready. I can't tell you the sense of not the sense of teamwork, but the necessary chain. And if any part of that chain fails, the whole team can't do its job. So it's a miracle the military gets anything done.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because it seems like it's well structured, that it's so well structured that they're willing to give the responsibility to a 22-year-old. So making sure that 22-year-old knows the extent of what they're involved in.
So they only know what they need to know. I also learned a lot of this stuff over the course of my 8 years, and I didn't get it up front. I didn't even get it when I was flying in combat. They tell you what you need. Like, here's what you need to make your plane work. Here's what you need to make your bomb go off. Do you need to know about safety and security measures on that? No, in fact, we'd rather not, because we don't want you going rogue or getting kidnapped and tortured or anything else. Remember earlier I said you can become kind of an automaton or a robot, and good soldiers are robots. And hopefully someday we can replace them. Sea of Phoebe will be moving the speed forward, and I think we're getting closer to the end. But if we could come back and this is good. But they have a bunch of scientists that have analyzed, because no one wants this to happen. We spent a lot of money not just building these, but even more money making sure that we understood, or we'd imagined every worst case possible outcome. In the interest of speeding this up, and Phoebe is advancing the slides because we don't want to keep you too long, this is the modern day, if you see the Iron Cross on the side of that is a Luftwaffe Tornado. That is a 45-year-old jet that is still in service today, carrying that 50-year-old bomb It's had some minor upgrades. And they're going to go and try to, if they had to do it, if Russia attacks with a nuke, they would then be the ones to respond to people, which would again make it easier at night, bad weather, but especially by having, gotcha, okay, 10 minutes? Did I read that correct? 10 minutes. This would have worked well in 1985. Will it work in 2025? There's a whole reason they're buying new ones. We're buying a newer, I'm sorry, since Ukraine got invaded, Europe has done an about face. The Green Party had almost gotten Germany out of the nuclear bomb business. They were going to retire this plan and not replace it. They were going to kick American bombs out of their country. And suddenly, Germany realized, hey, Poland is flat, and Poland touches Ukraine, and the Russian army could be here in like 18 hours. Germany is now bending over backwards buying the new stealthy F-35 that probably can penetrate enemy airspace despite these radical new innovations. One person, alone and unafraid, as we used to say. Next one, please, Phoebe. This is just a picture of the F-16 that certain nations in, I believe, Holland just replaced their F-16s with that F-35. I think Belgium is still waiting to. Next slide. And of course, the British were in this game because they'd actually fought actual Nazis and had them. But England, when the wall came down, they retired all their tactical bombs, and they only have submarines with city-busting missiles. And except they've said, oh, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe we need something between end-of-the-world kind of bombs and a pop gun. Maybe we need a tactical nuclear weapon that we can put on a short-range fighter, that we can stop the army over there without blowing up Moscow.
And what we can see in like TV and movies, that big mushroom cloud, as you're saying right now, that's what we don't want. That's not the type of weaponry that's being used in these contexts. And it's more of this kind of weaponry that we see more often.
You remember I said we're upgrading the 50-year-old B-61? We're making it a smaller bang. It used to be, it had a big bang because you knew we were going to miss the target. They've added some precision guidance to it. They still won't use like a laser guide or anything else. They don't want it to talk. They don't want anyone to be able to jam it or shut you down. So, and we're about to see the French solution the otherwise. They don't believe that you can fly over and drop a gravity bomb anymore. They do have theirs on a missile that's going to go 100 miles so the pilot doesn't get killed on the way. But we've now made our bomb slightly smarter so you can now loft it and throw it ahead of you. And you don't have to get right up close to where the biggest of the defenses are. But we also made it smaller because if it's got smart guidance and will hit where you aim, it doesn't need a big bang. And a lot of the scientists say, oh, well, that's bad because it lowers the threshold of using these things. And the point is actually, yes, it makes the other side think we might actually use this. Because if you have these giant bombs that make giant mushroom clouds and make huge chunks of the country disappear, do you believe most democratic leaders would authorize that? You know, a lot of people in Germany said, I'd much rather just surrender to the mothers than to blow up half of East Germany trying to stop them. They now have this new smart small bomb that's like, oh, you can use this thing. It'll stop the army in the field. It'll barely blow up beyond that pasture, and it won't make much radiation either. So the other sides are going to believe we might use this sucker against them.
Right. That's really interesting. And it's really interesting thinking from your perspective where you started from and going back to that 22-year-old. And that, what year was that, would you say, that photo that we saw?
The one of
the 22-year-old with the missile?
That photo, I pulled that off Wikipedia. I don't know. Well, I know when it was taken. It was at least taken after the 90s.
Okay. And the reason why I bring that up is because, being a young person today, where we have like social media and internet and all these things that consume our attention, do we have young people that are able to take the time and responsibility to learn these things, or is there attention in a lot of different spaces? And the real question I want to ask is, if you were today enlisting and being responsible for something like this, how do you think you would have performed and taking on this responsibility?
Again, it's something you don't realize you're getting into it. It's like so many, anyone who's ever done mountain climbing or anything else, it turns out it's different than what you think it is or read about books. But every young person thinks that they can do it better. But the people today that might do this, engineers or techno geeks, maybe people on the spectrum. In fact, I will tell you, people on the spectrum make great aviators and warriors, because if you can have that single-minded focus on the job. Let's try to wrap up, or I'm going to try to wrap up with these pictures and try to do rapid fire through them. So Phoebe, can you give me the next? I'm briefly going to touch on the French, because again, the French had their capital occupied by the Nazis, and they don't want that to happen again. They had a gravity-dropped bomb, and years ago they decided that unlike where NATO keeps thinking their plane's going to get through and drop the thing without getting shot down, they thought, we're going to get bagged. So next slide, please. They came up with this. This is the French nuclear bomber today. Note it's a two-seater, because having a navigator really helps. One more, Phoebe, and we can see the new weapon. They have that white thing underneath. Only the tiny tip is the nuclear bang bit. The rest of it is a missile that'll fly about 150 miles or more, because it's over 1,000 miles from France to Moscow. And France wants to be able to say at least, don't try it, we'll make you regret it. Next one. The Indian Air Force bought this French, and I'm going to try to wrap up this whole thing because I mentioned there might be some Southwest Asia also. India and Pakistan have been fighting each other as long as there's been an India and a Pakistan. And it turns out if you want to know how the future of air war is going, look at how the Indian and Pakistanis are doing. And they just had a major battle several weeks ago where the Indian Air Force, which is the 800-pound gorilla, and they had these new fancy French planes with all the latest Cold War electronics, and that's what's blown up on, this is the French plane flown by the Indians that has all the different electronic boxes. It's stuff they designed 15 years ago to defend the threat 15 years ago. Didn't help them 15 years later. The Pakistanis kicked the butt of the Indians using some good old-fashioned ambush tactics. The Indians kind of got in a Custer. The Indians were acted like Custer. Any case, I just say that because all the rules have changed, and every piece of technology, the Indians thought they had the latest and the greatest, and everyone feared them because they had this thing. And it didn't help because the other side was more inventive, and oh, by the way, they got the latest stuff from the Chinese that turns out to be better than you might think. The Chinese hardware shined. And again, I will try to wrap this up. If you're going to fight anybody, you need good intelligence, going back to the team. When we were bombing a MiG base, we'd go within 90 miles because the intelligence people said, they have this missile that can reach out and get you 80 miles away. If you go to 90 miles, you'll be safe. The Indians thought they understood the range of the Pakistani missiles, and they were wrong. Just wrong. And for the airplane geeks, I will also say the Pakistanis were able to ambush them while they were all getting ready in this big package, like we used to do when, since Vietnam, if we're going to send an air raid into the country, we send a bunch of planes together to help each other out. Well, first they all have to go to the tanker to refuel, and you see them milling around. You see them coming. And the Pakistanis knew what the Indians were going to do because they'd been watching them. And they waited until they're just milling around, refueling, and then they shot this missile that went way farther than anybody thought, bagged a whole bunch of them. Thus, you can always be wrong. And one more, and we're almost done. The Indians came back, or one more slide, please, Phoebe, and we're almost done. The Indians then came back with one of my themes, which is, it turns out flying over enemy territory, dangerous, gonna get you killed. You better have a long-range smart weapon that you can lob way ahead of you, because if you have to fly over their heads and drop it on them, they're probably gonna shoot you. And the Indian response to this Pakistani defeat was they then got they got their expensive smart weapons. They didn't cross the border. They blew up a bunch of very valuable stuff to the Pakistanis, to the point where the world was worried they were going to each go to the next level and start nuking each other. And everyone said, stop, be adults. thus showing that deterrence can work, and you can stop the escalation if you show, like, hey, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back.
Right.
And I wish I had a better solution to prevent war, but that's all PhDs have to give us.
Right. But it's great having that insight in who you're working with and making those decisions together. That's
Well, and other nations can help run this experiment so we don't kill ourselves. I will actually try to end, since this is the Adventurers Club, we have a member who's not here today, I was hoping he would be, who helped found the Planetary Society with Carl Sagan. He's a noted scientist and an astronomer. And Carl Sagan did more than almost anyone else to prevent a nuclear war, because early PhDs used to focus on how do you fight it. And Carl came up with promoted the idea of nuclear winter. He pointed out, hey, if you let this happen, we might lose the ability to grow food from the dust, and we'll be blocking our crops, and we're all going to starve. So you'll kill the planet accidentally. So don't do this. So it turns out a peacenik PhD might have saved the planet in the 1980s, and his colleague is a member of this club. And Lou, admire you so much. Thank you.
it's a point for scientists. Well, thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'd like to open up to the floor.
Yeah, David, I'm going to take the first one. I'm going to ask you a question. It's probably worth an entire program, but it's a little word called drones, which have hit. Now, you didn't touch on that at all, but that's a whole game changer now.
The drones are one thing that makes it hard to go into enemy territory, and it might enable you to, because you've all heard of stealth airplanes. And by the way, I will briefly tell you the stealth airplanes that NATO is now buying, they're ours, but Russia has one, China's multiples, and theirs are good. The future is going to be that plane might be able to get near enemy territory with a person in it to make the decisions. And the drones are going to go forward and sniff out the enemy, or actually fly over and say, hey, yeah, that is what you want to hit, or jam the radar. So drones, the future of military aviation is what we call collaborative combat aircraft, loyal wingmen, robot planes with some artificial intelligence that they know if they recognize that signal, oh, I know what that means. That means that radar is going to shoot my guy. I need to jam that radar. So yeah, drones have changed everything. It is a total program. But again, I am here to tell you that all the military hardware we have today, completely obsolete, including the F-35 fighter, because we started designing that thing in the 90s. We're now generating the next generation, the sixth generation of fighter, isn't even an airplane. The next generation air dominance system is a family of systems. Some drones that go over here as sensors, another drone that's a weapons truck. You don't have to get up close to the guy to shoot a missile at him. You send a drone over, you can see him with your radar, and the drone shoots the missile at him. You don't have to go into the danger zone. So basically, almost all aviation equipment in a high-end conflict is obsolete, and whoever builds the new stuff faster and figures out how to use it, like usual, will rule the day.
Other questions?
Hi, I got a question. You alluded to it in your presentation already, and where I'm getting to is low-yield nuclear bombs. So historically, after World War II, we're talking about kiloton bombs, and soon after that, they became megaton bombs because they wanted them as big as possible, having two purposes. One is just to make sure you hit everything that you want to hit, because the accuracy was really bad.
There was no accuracy.
And there was the concept of MAD, mutual assured destruction. Then in the 90s, we started hearing about low-yield nuclear bombs.
Because people realize no one's going to authorize using these big bombs.
Yeah.
Could you picture Barack Obama authorizing a bomb that will take away half of Belgium?
Mm-hmm. So they started talking about it, and soon after that, the politicians said, oh, no, we can't have this. And where I'm getting to, can you talk to that a little bit more? But then with low-yield nuclear weapons for a while, like end of the 90s, early 2000s, this was a big no-no in political in the political arena. But now Trump was one of the first ones that started authorizing. Well, he was not the first
Yeah,
one. I think
first time in office.
Yeah, yeah, but Putin already started it, and he countered it with authorizing low-yield nuclear
And
weapons
some
on our side.
hypersonic weapons. The Russians have these hypersonic weapons that aren't even airplanes.
So where I'm getting into, can you allude more to what the future is going to be of low-yield nuclear weapons and how that's going to evolve in the coming decades?
So I didn't hammer much theory on deterrence, but a key part of deterrence, of making sure no one uses these on you, is they have to believe you're going to hit them back. And if you have this giant weapon that's going to kill a bunch of civilians, they're just not going to believe you're going to use it. But if you have a bastard like Putin, he might be like, yeah, I'm willing to use it, and they're not. I win. I get to blackmail them. And the politicians hated the idea of low yield, and all the PhDs said, if you understand game theory, and if you want to deter these people, you have to have a credible threat, and that means it has to be small enough that they think you're going to use it. And I also didn't touch on ground penetrating. We were just getting ground penetrating weapons, kind of like the bunker busters they were used against the Iranian system. But if you want to kill the dictator in an underground bunker or take out, say, their Iranian nuclear program, you have a low yield bomb that can be ground penetrating. And it turns out you can make these things survive punching through. Then it goes off underground and it makes a giant earthquake and blows up the bunker and whoever nasty is inside, or blows up the nuke program. And it might even make just a big ball of glass, a self-cauterizing wound without even any burp of radiation to the outside at all. In the 90s, they were tempting us with these ground-penetrating nuclear weapons that, again, they said, oh yeah, the things you have now are horrible, will be crimes against humanity if you use them. Pretty soon we'll have a ground-penetrating one where we can blow up their high-value targets and it won't even belch radiation into the atmosphere. And I think low yield can open that door too. I hope that.
You mentioned the extent to which we secure our nuclear stockpiles, and the bombs are designed to be essentially, hopefully, impossible to trigger on accident, even if stolen, and all these other things. To what extent do you know that the Russians took as much care in designing their weapons, or perhaps did they not?
So I have no inside intelligence on this, but back then, the stuff I read says they were more sloppy, just as their entire submarine program was 3 Mile Island waiting to happen, and it did. Their bombs didn't have as many measures. We were so worried that we shared a lot of these safety measures with them, the so-called permissive action leagues. We went not just to the Russians, to Pakistan, to North Korea. They're nations that had a nuclear program. South Africa had a nuclear program, and we think they tested a bomb. We went to these nations and we're like, we don't want you to do this, but if you do, here is a chastity belt for that thing. Please use it. And you don't have to use ours, but do something like this so you don't have something horrible happen and have this literally blow up in your face.
David, thank you very much, sir. Add a couple things to one. As low-yield tactical weapons, we did have a couple things, Davy Crockett and Sodom, which I'm intimately with, and
backpack-style bombs.
Yeah, and the Fulda Gap plan in the 90s was, and 80s before the wall came down, was all about that. And I remember going to conferences where we were all scratching our heads saying, "You got to be kidding," because the Russian machine, no one ever believed they'd come, and there was a fight then, about whether to deploy those things. And the Davy Crockett was more inaccurate than anything else in the world, but that was the Army's answer to that problem. And those were very low yield.
Because there's an old saying, a saying in the Cold War about the trouble with Germany is the villages are less than a kiloton apart.
Right. And then on another point, the situation with young kids, when the commentator Nera asked about, are there people that would do this? There's always people that stand up. In every republic, there's always people that stand up and understand this. And it's something that you can accept or not in this day and age, but it's there. And we're seeing that in recruiting, and it doesn't make them blind. It makes them open to understand that somebody's got to do those kind of things. So it's very interesting to hear this, and it's really great, David. Thank you so much.
There were many a late night discussion of like, if the call came, would you fly this mission? Would you do this? And I don't believe that in this macho culture, people would actually share their feelings if they wouldn't. I don't think they'd come out and say it. But to a person, everyone said, fuck yeah. Or as we used to say, I'm pressing the I believe button. I've bought into this system enough. We have civilian control. This is beyond my pay grade. If the politicians say this is important, as that Top Gun movie says, we don't make policy, we execute it.
David, thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for your service.
Thanks for writing the checks, man. I would have done it for free.
And for those at home, thank you for watching. We're here every Thursday night. Please come to the Adventures Club and take more of our presentations. Have a good night.